question for you all. If you could improve one skill in communication that would make a huge difference in your life, what skill would that be? And you could put your answers in the chat. I'll give you a choice of 4, because these are the primary ways that we communicate. We read, we write, we speak, we listen. So if you could improve your reading, or you could improve your writing, or you could improve your speaking, you could improve your listening, one skill that would improve your overall results in life, what would that be? Getting lots of answers. And in my 30 years experience, it's listening. Interestingly enough, we have courses in reading in school. We have courses in writing in school. We even have courses in speaking, but almost nobody that I've ever talked to remarks that they have a course in listening. And I find that fascinating. The one thing that would make the most difference. And when I talk about listening, I'm not just talking about hearing, I'm reminded of the 2 guys who were talking to each other across the fence in their backyards. And the one guy said, I've got these new hearing aids. They're really amazing. My hearing is so much better now. Little expensive. They ran about $5,000, but boy, it's worth it. Amazing. And the other guy says, well, what kind are they? And he says, 230. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about listening. 3 guys walking down the street. And one guy says, wow, it's windy today. And the second guy says, no, I think it's Thursday. And the third guy says, yeah, me too. Let's go get a beer. Now, that's not the kind of listening I'm talking about. And just one more for you. Don't play the crickets, please. And that is about an 85-year-old guy walking down the street with a really gorgeous woman on his arm. And he runs into his doctor, who says to him, wow, you're looking pretty good. Things must be going pretty well. And the guy says, well, I'm just doing what you told me to do, doc. And he said, what's that? And he said, be cheerful, get a hot mama. And the doctor said, no, I said, be careful, you've got a heart murmur. That's not what I'm talking about. Now, we're talking about listening and how to improve your listening in order to get the results you want, whether that's in sales, whether that's in management or leadership, or even if it's just to improve the relationships that you have at work or at home. If you could improve your listening, and today for the short talk, I checked with Patricia. She told me I didn't have an hour. I didn't have 3, certainly. I didn't even have an hour. We were just going to talk for 20 or 30 minutes. I thought what I'd do is I'd talk about what are some of the things that get in the way of listening? What are the things that get in the way of listening? And I've isolated 4 main things. The first one's easy. It's distractions. Easy to point out, easy to talk about, not so easy to get rid of. The distractions in life. Sometimes we're doing more than one thing at a time. Sometimes we have screens. We have so much coming at us in today's world. It's really difficult to listen effectively with so much going on. So that's the first thing. If you've got something important to communicate to somebody, if you could eliminate if you can, but at least reduce the distractions, that would be really, really helpful. So that one's easy. We get that one out of the way. The second one I want to talk about is a little more subtle. It's what I call the voice in your head. Some of you might be thinking, voice in my head? What voice in my head? I don't have a voice in my head. What are you talking about, voice in my head? That one. The voice that's always on. It's always talking to you. It's always speaking whatever judgments or whatever thoughts you've got. It's always on. And that gets in the way of listening. Sometimes it's not even your voice. Sometimes it's somebody else's voice. Sometimes I have my father's voice in my head. Sometimes it's my mother's voice in my head. Other society voices in our head. That voice in your head can get definitely in the way of listening because it's speaking to you all the time. It reminds me of three addictions that have gotten in the way of listening, and it's tied into the voice in your head. So when I say the word addiction, what comes to mind for you? You could type that into the chat. So when I say addiction, what are the things that you think of when you think of addiction? Looking at the chat. Drugs, I see drugs. Yes, that's definitely an addiction. Alcohol, very good. Food, very good. Some people are addicted to food. Coffee, very good. Chocolate, all good things. Social media, that's a relatively new one. Some people are addicted to social media. You know, some of the answers that often come up as well are shopping. Some people are addicted to shopping. Some people are addicted to sex. Some people are addicted to alcohol, smoking, tobacco, all kinds of addictions. And I'll share with you, I've tried all of those things. Fortunately, I've never been addicted to any of them, but I've been addicted to three things that are more debilitating than any of those things, and three things that have ruined more relationships than all of those things put together. You care to know what those three things might be? Well, the first one is the addiction to being liked, the addiction to approval. I had that addiction. I was addicted to being liked. Now, the World Health Organization, by the way, defines addiction as something that if it's not satisfied, it can cause you to behave poorly. It can be physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional. I was addicted to being liked, which meant I would rather that you like me than get results in my life. So if you're in sales of any kind and you're addicted to being liked instead of getting the result, all someone had to do is like you, and you walk out happy. You don't walk out rich, but you walk out happy. And that's, my early sales career was much like that because, I had to be liked. It reminds me of a story that my speaking coach, Patricia, we really do need to talk about that. But my first speaking coach, I had the opportunity to spend a weekend with Bill Gove, who was the first president of the National Speakers Association. And he gifted me this story about a woman named Phyllis Thaxter. Who was the guy on NBC, weatherman who used to do the birthdays, the 100-year-old birthdays? Help me out. So anybody?
Willard Scott.
Thank you very much. Yes, Willard Scott. Thank you. So Willard Scott and his team sent up a team to interview Phyllis Thaxter, who had turned 103, and she was from New England. And they went up and they interviewed Ms. Thaxter. She was sitting on her porch, and they said, "Ms. Thaxter, we did a little research and we found out that you never got married." And she said, "That's right. I never married. I was a teacher, and I figured my pupils were my students, and they were my children. I never decided to marry." And they said, "Ms. Thaxter, we did a little further research and we found out that when you pass, you've decided not to have any male pallbearers." And she said, "That's right. No, ma'am. All women. All women. No men. They didn't take me out when I was alive. They ain't taking me out when I'm gone." But I say that story for this reason. When you think about Phyllis Thaxter, do you like her? It's really interesting that people who are addicted to being liked, who they try so hard to be liked, what happens is you end up not liking them. And yet someone like Phyllis, who has no regard, doesn't care if you like her or not. She's so authentic, you end up liking her. You find yourself liking her. So that's the first addiction, the addiction to being liked. Worse, addiction number 2, and I suffered from this for a long, long time. It took me at least 50 years to get over this one, and that was the addiction to being right. The thought that I'd rather be right than actually get a result. The story I like to tell about this is a story by a guy named Spencer Johnson. Spencer Johnson became famous when he wrote the book, Who Moved My Cheese? And but Spencer was a best-selling author way before that. Not many people know, but there are a few people, I guess, on this phone call who might know. But Spencer co-wrote the book, The 1 Minute Manager, with Ken Blanchard. And Spencer also co-wrote a book called The 1 Minute Salesperson by Larry Wilson. Both are great books. And Spencer was the main writer. And Ken Blanchard got with Spencer and said, why don't you write a book about that story that you talk about with the mouse in a maze? And if you haven't read Who Moved My Cheese, I recommend you read it. I'm not going to do a book report. It's a great book about how to deal with change, but it really emanates from a story about a mouse in a maze. And there are 4 tunnels in this maze, and there's a piece of cheese at the end of a tunnel. And what the mouse will do is will go down the first tunnel. If there's no cheese, comes back out, goes down the second tunnel, no cheese, comes back out, goes down the third tunnel, finds a piece of cheese, and ultimately will be conditioned to just get into the maze and go down the third tunnel and get the cheese, go down the third tunnel and get the cheese, until one day the cheese gets moved to another tunnel. And the mouse goes into the maze and goes down the third tunnel, no cheese. Comes back out, looks around, goes down the third tunnel, no cheese. Comes back out, looks around, goes down the third tunnel a third time, and this time goes down very carefully, very slowly, exploring every nook and cranny, no cheese. Comes back out, and finally we'll go down the first tunnel, go down the second tunnel, go down the third tunnel again, and then go down the fourth tunnel, and in the fourth tunnel finds the cheese. The difference between the mouse and a human being is a human being will continue to go down the third tunnel until it starves, because the third tunnel is the right tunnel. That's the story behind Who Moved My Cheese that caused Spencer to write that book. So the addiction to being right has probably killed more relationships than any other addiction, with the possible exception of the third addiction. And the third addiction is the granddaddy of them all. And that's the addiction to the notion that the only way I can be happy is if everything goes the way I want it to go and everyone behaves the way I want them to behave. It's a control addiction, that it always has to go my way. Those 3 addictions, the addiction to being liked, the addiction to being right, and the addiction to it has to go my way, kill relationships, and it gets in the way of listening. Because if I have to be right, I'm not really listening to what you say. If I have to be liked, I'm really not listening to what you say. And if I have to be in control and it always has to go my way, I'm not really listening to you. And that leads into the third area that gets in the way. And it's an area that a friend of mine, Nito Cobain, I know Patricia knows Nito and Gary knows Nito. Nito assigned a name to this called agenda anxiety. And agenda anxiety gets in the way of listening. And it's the notion that what I have to say is more important than what you have to say or what the other person has to say. And that agenda anxiety really gets in the way of listening, because it's what will cause me to interrupt you when you're talking, because I think what I have to say is more important. It causes me to control the whole conversation and not listen to you at all, because it's a notion of what I have to say. It reminds me of another case study of a guy that I coached about 10, 15 years ago, early 2000s, an attorney. And this guy was very successful. He was billing about $500,000 a year and collecting half of that. So he was billing $500,000, collecting $250,000. I know I'm speaking into the Golden Gate Breakfast Club. So in San Francisco, the cost of living in San Francisco and the income levels in San Francisco are a little higher than Pittsburgh. So in Pittsburgh, $500,000 billed and 250,000, a family of four can live really comfortably on 250,000. Just to give you an idea, a little aside, your real estate values are about 10 times higher than Pittsburgh's. So a house that would sell for 150,000 is going to be about $1.5 million in San Francisco area. I noticed there were quite a few real estate people on the call, so that gives you an idea. So living on $250,000 in Pittsburgh is not bad, but he's only collecting 50% of his billables, and he's not happy. So he hires me to not only increase his billables, but mostly increase his collections. And when I was working with him, what I noticed was he's very, very good at what he does. And like most attorneys, he communicates in two ways. He lets the client know, this is how the process works, and this is how I get paid. Most attorneys who have been around the block know what they're doing, and they think their job in communication is to explain to the client, this is how everything's going to work. And what they miss is they never get an idea that the client is in relationship with the attorney. They never bother to find out what the client wants. Or even worse, when agenda anxiety kicks in, when the client mentions what they want, the attorney, who's heard it 1,000 times before, jumps in with a solution before really listening to or even questioning what is behind all of that and what is the client really looking for. And when we worked together, when I got my client to see that really hanging in there and listening to the client, even though you've heard it hundreds of times or 1,000 times before, but really listening to it like it's the first time you've ever heard it, you're going to form a bond that the client is going to end up loving. And that's the key to getting paid, because the client feels served. In short, after working with me for a year, the attorney was now billing close to $1 million a year and collecting 95%. So he doubled his billing and almost quadrupled his collections. That's the power of listening. But that's also the way agenda anxiety can get in the way of it. Last, not least, about 35 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with a guy named Fernando Flores. I know I've dropped a few names. That's a name that you may not know. Fernando Flores was a guy who was in Allende's cabinet in Chile. And when Allende was overthrown, everybody in the cabinet was killed except for Fernando Flores, who had communicated well enough. He was the communications minister, and he had communicated well enough to save his life. He was put into prison, and while in prison, he taught himself the English language, escaped, and got to California, And in the early 80s, in 82, 83, I had an opportunity to work with him. And Fernando developed this system, this theory that we speak and we hear through filters. This is way before Stephen Covey talked about seeing through lenses. Fernando was talking about we speak and we hear through filters. We all have one. Even people who are said to have no filter because they say whatever's on their mind, that's a filter. They're still speaking through a filter. And just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, let's say there's two people talking to one another, and one person says blue, and he says it through a blue filter, which would be true blue. Saying the word blue through a blue filter is blue. But the woman that he's talking to has a filter that's yellow. If you know your colors, that means the guy said blue, but the woman heard green because she's hearing blue through a yellow filter, which becomes green. And that happens every day. Now, our filters aren't colored necessarily, they're attitudinal. So we have different attitudes and we have different experiences and we have different backgrounds, and all of it gets into your filter, including anything that might have happened this morning on your way to your computer, or anything that happened this morning. For instance, someone's getting ready for a trip. That's now in their filter. And will that get in the way of listening? Perhaps. It doesn't necessarily have to get in the way of listening, but anything that's going on in your life will get in the way of listening. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. So if there are any questions about that, you can certainly put questions in. We don't have enough time to go into the whole aspect of it, but here's what Fernando said. Fernando said, the key to real communication is when you can control your filter. And that's the easy part, by the way, controlling your own filter. So anytime you go into a meeting, you have control over what your filter is going to be. If something bad happened to you this morning, you have control over whether that's going to flavor or that's going to affect any meeting that you go into. Because you can put it aside until later and deal with it, or you can have it color your filter if you choose. But you can have your filter be any way you want it to be. So if you were going to go into a communication, it's a question I often ask a client, if you were going to go into a communication, how would you want your filter to be? Would you want it to be open? Would you want it to be loving? Would you want it to be caring? Would you want it to be, how would you want it to be? So, and then I offer three things, 3 C's that I think are really important. One, caring. I think you go in with a caring filter. So now, if you're a person who does care about other people, then it's easy. If you're not, and there are people who are very successful in life and they just don't care that much about, the other humans on the planet, I'm not making a value judgment. That's just, but for the moment you're going to be in communication, you have to figure out a way to be caring, because I think it helps. The second C is contribution. To have contribution in your filter so that anything that you say or anything you hear comes through a filter of contribution. So even if you don't like the presentation I'm doing this morning, and you tell me, I don't like your presentation, I'm listening for what's the contribution in that. So tell me, if you are one of those people, I would ask you to tell me how I could make it better so that it would contribute to my ability to communicate the next time. And then the third one, and I sort of was a portend of what the third one is curious. So if you could be curious, because curiosity forces you to ask a question. I'm pretty sure if you go into a communication with somebody, defensive is not necessarily something that you want to have in your filter. So if someone says something to me that would cause me to be defensive, and I don't act on defensive, I'm curious instead, it causes me to ask a question instead of defend myself. I'm not saying defensive is a bad way to be. Defensive can be very useful. If you're walking towards your car and it's dusk and three large figures are walking towards you as you're walking to your car, defensive is probably a good way to be. However, if you're in a communication with your significant other, I'm going to just suggest that defensive might not work. I had 24 years of experience with that. Interestingly enough, one of my favorite disconnects until I finally figured out what my ex was saying. She would walk into a walk-in closet that was pretty nice size walk-in closet. I think it was 8 by 10, and she had enough clothes that you could hardly stick your hand into the walk-in closet. But she walked into the walk-in closet and she would try things on in the morning, and if she didn't like anything, her comment would be, "I don't have anything to wear." Now, if I were looking to get into trouble, I might say, "Don't have anything to wear? You can barely stick your hand into the walk-in closet, let alone walk in." But that's not going to go well. Finally, what I realized was when she would say, "I don't have anything to wear," I knew what she meant was, "I don't like the way anything looks on me." And I suggested, "I thought the navy blue looked good." Now, that didn't necessarily win me any points, but it certainly prevented a big argument. And that's what we're talking about. It's being able to control your filter and this is the tougher part, to have respect, have understanding, and a knowing of the other person's filter. That takes a little more time, and it takes a little more time than we have this morning. So the idea, though, is control your filter, have respect and understanding for the other person's filter, and now you have a chance at communication. And one of Fernando's favorite examples was, if you actually, this is a breakfast club, so if you go to a diner and you order eggs a particular way, the best chance you've got is you're going to get the chef's interpretation of the server's interpretation of what you said. So the clearer and more distinct you can be about your order, the better the chance you have of getting the eggs that you want. Fascinating example, I thought. I always loved that. So those are the four things. Distractions that certainly get in the way, the voice in your head, which certainly gets in the way, including the 3 addictions, agenda anxiety, the notion that what you have to say is more important than what the other person has to say, and then the filters. Whatever is in your filter can get in the way of communication. So what do we do about those things? And I want to give you 4 relatively short answers to what we can do about those things, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, if that's okay. So first, how do you handle distractions? Well, find a place, find a time, find a situation that helps reduce or eliminate the distractions. So if we can't always do that in the rush world that we live in the all the stimuli coming at us world that we live in. It's difficult. However, if you have a communication to deliver that's really important enough, shut down the screens. When my daughter wants to really talk to me about something that's important, I put my phone away. I turn the TV off if we happen to be in the same room. If we're on a computer, it's hard to turn the computer off, but I don't have the other stimuli coming in. I don't have the messages coming in on my computer. I've closed all the other windows. Why? Because it could distract and could ruin the whole moment or the mood of the conversation. So the easy thing to do with distractions is try to reduce as many as you can. The second thing, the voice in your head, you can't get rid of it. Let me repeat. You cannot stop it. The voice in your head, a lot of people think that voice is your conscience. It's not your conscience. It's a voice. Some people think it's your subconscious. It's not your subconscious because you're aware of it. Subconscious means you're not aware of it. It's not your subconscious. It's just a voice. It's always there and you can't stop it. If you think you can, try to stop it right now. I'll give you a couple of seconds. It's impossible. So what do? We make friends with it. Something I do, I'll just share this with you. I have a couple of teddy bears. I'm not in my own office. So if I were in my own office, I'd turn the screen around and show you that when I'm in my regular office, I've got 2 teddy bears on 2 bookshelves, one that's on to my left and one that's to the right. And they're on the 3rd shelf up from the bottom, which is eye level when I'm sitting in my chair. And I use those teddy bears because I call my voice my teddy bear. I like teddy bears. And so when the voice is there, and it's not always friendly, it usually shows up when I've done something that I didn't want to do, or I've done, I've made a mistake somehow, and the voice is there to criticize me. And I think to myself, oh, isn't that interesting that you've shown up now? Thank you. And so I thank it. I allow it to be. I make friends with it, if you will. I think of it as a teddy bear. If you like puppy dogs better, I recommend getting a couple of puppy dogs, putting them in space that you can see, because that voice is there and you might as well make friends with it. And that's the way you calm that voice down, is you make friends with it. The third, agenda anxiety, you just have to let it go. I'd say bite your tongue, do whatever you have to do, just stop it. Because if you're speaking, you're not learning. I learned that a long time ago. Another way, when I was in my sales career, if you're telling, you're not selling. The person, the whole addiction of control, you really want control, be the person who asks questions and listens. That's the person who's really controlling the conversation. The fact that I'm speaking now belies everything I'm saying, of course. I'd rather be listening to somebody else. But that's the way you handle the agenda anxiety. Is you just have to get over it. You're not that smart. I have to tell myself that all the time. And the filters, you can control your filter. And that's something that I would, if there was going to be homework from this, I would give you as homework, start to practice controlling your filter and making sure when you go into a communication, your filter is going to be the way you want it to be. It could be open, loving, caring, contribution, curious. And then there's practice, and there are tons and tons of books on the subject of communication, of how to ask good questions to try to understand what's going on over there in the other person. But I promise you, if there's something going on there, speaking the information you have to speak will not land well. So I'll bring it in for a landing on a notion, a story, and the notion is this. A lot of people say it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Well, I can't disagree with that. Of course, I agree. It's not what you say, it's also how you say it. But I'm going to add another one that's really, really helpful. It's not just what you say, and it's not just how you say it, but it's how it lands. You've got to take into consideration the landing and how it's going to land with the other person, because that's when true communication really happens. So important what you say, absolutely. Important how you say it, absolutely. But really important, how it lands. So my client, who was in sales and brilliant salesperson, she was in temporary services sales, really great, one of the top 5 salespeople I've ever met, just a brilliant salesperson. And she went to call on a customer, large customer that she had that was in a suburb south of Pittsburgh. And the guy calls her into her office, into his office, and he said, as a result of doing business with you, we have lost $5,000 a month over the last $15,000 a month over the last 3 months. And I assure you, we did not hire your company in order to lose money. And we've lost $15,000 a month over the last 3 months. In previous to working with me, in her former life, she would have gotten defensive and tried to explain how that loss had nothing to do with the service that she provided. However, instead of doing that, she said, "Oh my gosh, that's awful. Tell me more about that. How did that happen?" And he started to talk about what happened and how, in his estimation, how that was caused and how that happened. And she continued to question and listen even more about, what do you think we can do about that in the future? And just a line of questioning about the whole situation. And finally, she said, "Well, how can we make that up to you? How do you want us to do that? Do you want us to give you the $45,000? How do you want it?" He said, "No, we don't have to do that. What we have to do is we need to do more quality control and make sure that this doesn't happen. We need the quality of the people you're bringing has to be better. We need to do a better job on our end, of course, but we need to work more in partnership, and we're going to be just fine." So she not only saved the account, she didn't have to reimburse the $45,000, saved the account, and they were fabulous for another 5 to 10 years. So it was a continuing success story, all because she listened. I'll never forget the day she came back to me and she said, "Boy, I wasn't sure about this program, but man, did that really help. That just saved us $45,000. That's the value of being able to listen instead of just firing off and defending your turf. So eliminate or reduce the distractions, make that voice in your head a friend, let the agenda anxiety go, and do whatever you can to stop that notion or that feeling that you have to interrupt because what you have to say is more important, and pay attention to controlling your filter and having respect for the other person's filter. That's the key. And then you got a chance at communication. So I'll end with this magic moment, so different and so new, was like any other until I met you. And then it happened. It took me by surprise. I knew that you felt it too, by the look in your eyes.
Thank you very much, David. And beginning and ending with a strong yes. I think the times I've tried to do that in my presentations, I tend to have people get up and leave when I sing. So you might do a much better job. So, all right, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. If anybody wants to start that, Patricia, go ahead. You're on mute. There.
Well, wonderful presentation, David, and another great example of how a well-organized conversational delivered presentation is very engaging, with no slides or distractions. We focused on what you were saying. That was wonderful. I would like you to tell us more about your process with a new client. For example, someone calls and said, I was referred to you. How does your questioning go? And if you can think of a specific example, so it might be easier.
Thank you so much for that, Patricia. It just happened yesterday, and I'm not just saying that. It actually did. So this guy called me and was referred to me by one of my great advocates and centers of influence, and he's a pretty high-powered guy, and he wanted a program for his son, and he said, "Okay, what do you got?" Which is what a high-powered business person will often do when we're walking in. What do you got? And my response is always, I have a couple of questions. I don't start to tell them everything I got. I have a couple of questions. My first question is usually, what are we doing here? So, what is it that I said, or what is it that my referrer said that made you so intrigued that you decided to call me or decided to give me a meeting? And he'll answer, or she'll answer. And then my second question is always, well, what is it that you're looking for in this program? So if I could wave a magic wand and you could have anything you wanted out of this, not even knowing what it is, you could have anything you want. What are we trying to do? And so if you were an attorney and the customer comes in, your question would be, okay, so what are you looking to gain? What is it that you really want? And then sometimes I'll ask a question like, how do you mean that exactly? I learned that from Brian Tracy. How do you mean is grammatically incorrect, and it causes a more emotional response. It causes a deeper response, and people will never say, well, what do you mean? What do I mean? They always answer. It's really great. What do you mean causes argument in this culture. So if you say, what do you mean, especially with a tone, you're going to be in an argument. But if you say, how do you mean that? They answer. And then I always say, what else? Until they end the list. So I'll ask them what they want, and I'll get a whole list of things that they want. The next thing I do is I repeat that list back. So I let them know, this is what I heard. Is this accurate? And is there anything you want to add to that list? At that point, thank you for asking this, by the way, because this is the real subject of my next book, Bringing in the Business. It's teaching how to do this process. I call it the David Goldman enrollment process, where the next thing, now I ask a question of value. I learned that from your friend, Alan Weiss. I learned from all these people, right? So I now ask the question, if I made all of these things happen, what would that be worth to you? Because I need to get from them an idea of what in their mind is the value of that. Hopefully my fee is less than the value that they put on it. And only then do I take 10 to 12 minutes to describe my program, how it works, in the logistics of it. And then the last part is, even if you do a superb job at all of those things, very rarely does someone jump up and down and say, ooh, I want this. You have to ask for action. You have to say, and my favorite is on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 means you never want to see me again, 10 means you're ready to start tomorrow. Where are you? And then the question is, what will it take to get to 10?
I think you have a lot of people on this call, mine included, little head buzzing how we can improve this process.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I could keep asking questions, but I'm going to shut up and pass to Tony to look to see who else wants to ask. This is and you will come back to talk about the new book. And if we run out of questions, I would like you to tell us about the last book we introduced about getting what we really want.
Yeah, thank you.
Claudette, you've got a question, followed by Don Lee.
I do. I think I heard you say it's always good for us to understand the filter that the person we're talking to is coming from. However, I'm thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, that if I have a filter, whatever I am thinking about their filter, I could be projecting some things from myself. So how do I not do that to understand their filter? Is there a way to ask them, though they don't know I'm asking about their filter, and get it?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for that. And you're right. It's very delicate. You don't want to presuppose, but you can usually tell, especially when you're involved with somebody, your relationship is such that you know them pretty well. You can tell when there's something going on. Now, you can't just say, "Hey, I noticed there's something going on. What's going on with you?" Because that's a little too confrontational. But you say, is there something else that we need to talk about that might be getting in the way of what we want to talk about here? I mean, there's ways to do it that are opening, and it happens. But that's where the work is. I mean, that's a muscle that has to be strengthened, and it has to be developed. So that's why a coaching program doesn't take just 20 minutes.
You prefaced your comment, though, with someone you know, and I was thinking in sales, I may not know that person.
Right.
But
Really great. So just let me say, walking in, there's something called an already listening.
Mm-hmm.
So Claudette, remind me what you do.
Actually, I'm a coach and a speaker.
Okay, good. So if you're a coach and a speaker and you're walking in to sell a program,
mm-hmm.
They've got an already listening about that. They've got an already listening about coaches and speakers.
Yes.
You're aware of that, right?
Yeah.
It's an eye roll, especially for coaching, right? I love it when someone says that they've been in a coaching program with somebody else and it didn't go well. I love that. Of course you have. Of course you have. So because coaching became, you got fired from your HR position. I don't want to be offending anybody if anybody's like this on the call, but you get fired from an HR position, and you go out and buy a truck and a ladder and you become a coach. There's more to it than that, as hopefully, and that. So yeah. So I know that most people think, "Oh, coaching. Okay, here we go." And everybody and their mother now is a coach. And so, okay, what are you going to do for me? And here's the thing: when I speak to coaches associations from time to time, and I do a program called, "All right, you're professional, you're certified. Congratulations. Are you making any money?" And so, and we do a business talk. And one of the startling things that I tell them is nobody wants a coach. Now, they've just been pumped up, and, everybody wants a coach. Everybody needs a coach. No. Not only don't they need one, they don't want one. It's like you go into the hardware store to buy a drill, but you don't want a drill. You want a hole. Right? So the hardware store convinces you that a drill is the best way to get a hole. So my job is not to say you need a coach. My job is to find out what it is you really want. And then is there a fit? Is there a connection that coaching might get you there? See, I know what I really sell is time. Because in my life, my third book, by the way, Patricia, the book after the next one is going to be how I turned my life around. And I did. It took me about 6 years to turn my professional life around. And then it took me another 6 to turn my personal life around. So 12 years, I turned my life around. I think you can do it in 12 months. And if that gap is important to you, doing it in 12 months rather than 12 years, and coaching can get you there, there might be a value there.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
Well, I think that I will explore some of those 3 C's, et cetera, to see
Yeah.
if I can't start a conversation where they will, in between the lines, give me some of their filters.
Exactly. They'll reveal.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claudette. And Don Lee, go ahead.
Thanks. Great talk. Is your book available on Amazon?
It is. Thank you.
Considered another one bought. And my question is, I had this wealthy investor, but always saying something negative in front of other people. I'm going to switch to asking questions instead of being defensive, but can I add, what can I do to have you stop saying this because it really annoys me, or how can I say that a little better?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, you don't want to do it when he's in front of anybody else.
Okay, thought about that after listening to you.
Yeah. So the first thing you have to do is you have to be alone.
Okay.
And I don't have all the right answers. I'm just,
Yeah.
on first blush, what I would do is I would fall on my sword a little bit. And I would say, there's something that's bothering me. And I just need to have a conversation with, because here's the thing, most people who we deem as negative or we deem as having a bad attitude, I've never met anybody who had a bad attitude.
Oh.
I'll let that percolate a little bit, because some people might be thinking, well, I got a couple of people I'd like you to meet because they have a bad attitude. But if you've ever asked anybody or said to somebody that you thought that they had a bad attitude, what you'll get is bad attitude. I don't have a bad attitude. I'm just a realist. I'm not negative. So if you ask somebody, if you suggest that they're negative, they'll just say they're not negative. They're a realist. That's what they'll say, because everybody's a hero in their own movie. So what I'm suggesting is buy a couple of tickets to the theater and to watch the movie that they're watching, and see how are they looking at the world, because they don't think they're showing up negative. They think they're pointing out what they need to point out. And some people think that's a real skill, by the way. Some people think that their best skill is they've got an ability to point out what's wrong. Well, we all can do that. So you might want to find out why or what motivates them to always point out what's wrong. And just inquire as to what's the result they would really want, what's the result they're looking to get by doing that. How does that move the ball forward? How do we become a better organization? Sometimes it does. If you don't have that person who points out what's wrong, you produce Edsels. The Edsel was produced in the late 50s by a team that said, here's an idea. And they had cheerleaders who said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go do that. And nobody said, hey, wait a minute, it's ugly. Nobody's going to buy it. So sometimes that's a valuable piece, but you really want to find out what's motivating it and what to what end are we doing that? Because does that really serve us to point out every little? I remember a guy, I can't remember his name, but I remember a guy who used to always talk about people look for fly poop in the pepper.
Okay, thank you. I inquire, find out from her side, do it privately.
Yeah, because otherwise it they'll dig in if you're doing it in front of other people.
Well, I believe everybody needs a coach, and you're my hero of the day. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Raise your hand, or Gary, unmute so we can hear it. There you go.
David, thank you. Very thoughtful presentation. That was great. You mentioned a couple of things, and that are just great reminders for me, is that every communications class and presentation and workshop should probably begin with listening as the topic. And then we'll get into other phases of communication, but the most important part is listening. And thanks for the reminder on
Thank
that one.
you.
And the other one that I find a lot is leaders who do want to consume all the air in the room. However, when we start working on questions, and I spend a lot of time on questions and how to ask them, changes the whole nature of the conversation.
Yeah.
Do you found that too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've dealt with people who, you know, it's smartest guy in the room syndrome, right?
Yeah.
And so, and so here's the real issue, because I've dealt with two people like this. What happens when you really are the smartest guy in the room? So I had a couple of people, they've got all the degrees, they've got all the, credential, they've got, and they really are brilliant. They're brilliant people. But if you're really the smartest guy in the room, you want to walk around like you're the smartest guy in the room? How smart is that? It's not working.
Yeah.
So, if you're so I get them to see, a lot of people call it emotional intelligence, right? The EQ side. But if you're really the smartest guy in the room, you want to downplay that fact and use the intelligence in the room and use the intelligence on the team so that you don't squelch the other people. Because those are the best leaders. The best leaders are the leaders that let other people shine. Now, who's the smartest guy in the room?
Yeah, exactly. Great presentation.
Thank you so much. Coming from you, that's high praise. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions out? Any other questions? Betty, go ahead.
This is probably one of the best presentations on communication that I have heard, David, and I thank you. I took notes. I'm going to re-listen to the recording when we get it, because I missed some of the really good questions that you were saying more recently in the Q&A. My question to you is, first of all, I'm really learning on listening more and questioning more. And as you mentioned, it's all about relationships with your attorney presentation or example you gave. My problem is that, well, I have a lot, but one of the problems is I'm a rapid person. And I know what the person's going to say before they say it, and I want to get on with it. Time is of the essence. I've got all this stuff to do, and I have to really, and I'm working on relaxing more. That's one of my words for the year is relax. And my problem with my agenda anxiety is I have to really focus and just listen and keep my mouth shut. And I'm working on that and I'm doing good. And I guess Rich is off the call, so I can talk now. And I'm really working with Rich on this because, and my two assistants, because they're so much slower than me. And so do you have any techniques of slowing down, just really focusing on listening and keeping mouth shut?
Thank you so much, because that what you've said is brilliant. So you started to answer your own question, actually. So the interesting thing is that, and I'll tell this to clients often, there's never enough time to listen. Then we have to find time to clean up the mess. Right? So, and it always takes more time to clean up the mess than it would have taken just to listen. So, this happens when you really, so agenda anxiety is sort of, is similar to the smartest guy in the room syndrome, because what happens if you actually do know more than the other person? And in your field, especially if you're dealing with a first home buyer, you do know more. And so it's if you're going to make the sale, I'm saying this in a market where it's easy to make the sale anyway right now, so don't talk about this right now, but if you're going to make the sale, it's almost entirely dependent on listening to what they really, really want. And so you just have to keep reminding yourself, it's important for me to listen to what they're saying, even if you've heard it 1,000 times, especially if you've heard it 1,000 times, because it's the first time for them. And that's the key. And so not only might you get more information by listening like that, but you're going to form a bond that'll never be broken. That's the key, because the time they buy their next house is going to be from you. You know Tom Hopkins, by the way? Yeah, so that was the key to, so Tom Hopkins, a little, I'll never forget, little technique he did was he sent thank you notes to every single person he ever showed a house. Not just the thank you note to the person who bought a house from him, but he sent thank you notes to the people who didn't buy from him, which meant the next time they bought a house, they bought from him. You know, and that's, you know, listening so that you can put something in the thank you note that's unique to them so that they feel like they were listened to. It's huge. I know where you're coming from, especially you've got so much to do and you got to get it done and you got to, you know, it's packing for the trip and this and I get it. But it's like, if you don't take the time to listen, you're going to have to find time to clean up the mess.
I like that comment. I wrote that down as well, but thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Tricia, go ahead.
How do we know what we really want?
You know, it's been a lifetime journey for me. That book, thank you, Patricia. So you want me to talk about the book. It's a series of 9 stories of people that hired me because they thought they wanted something. So someone hired me because they wanted to make more money. Someone hired me because they wanted to rearrange their schedule and spend more time with their family. What happens along the way is what we really, really want, I think, is to accept oneself, to, you know, the ability to accept yourself and actually get to a place where you like yourself. And once that happens, everything else falls into place. That's the real, so the key, the central thread of all the stories in the book is when people got to the point where they really saw what was important to them and what they really, really wanted, which is self-acceptance and self-approval and all those terms that start with the word self, other than selfish. That's when you really get what you want, and then everything else falls into place.
You know, that reminds me, in December, I was coaching the Academy members, the Speaker Academy members for the Las Vegas chapter. And I had everyone, I asked them, you know, what are you going to talk about? And once I started asking them questions, none of them ended up with what they thought they were going to talk about.
Exactly.
Because you have to have some experience or authority to be able to talk about it. So it was more what I think I should talk about than what it's going to be easier for me to develop.
Exactly. Or what's going to be the hot item of the day, right?
Yeah. Wonderful.
All right.
Thank
Well, I'm
you.
going to stop the recording. That way we're free to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And also, if